The Missing Witches podcast is brought to you by the Missing Witches Coven. Our coven mate, poet Sun, said, I came to this coven because nobody else was centering mutual aid and informed resistance like the Missing Witches, but this community is also hugely loving and supportive and full of artists and thinkers and healers who have such a huge diversity of experience. Even when we're not in circle, there's magic afoot. Also, I have a chronic illness, which makes it really hard not to swear all the time, so I am in fabulous company here. Bless a fucking being. And coven mate Jen from Wheel in My Ear wrote, I discovered Missing Witches through Queen of All Queens, Jinx Monsoon's podcast. After reading their contributor covenant, I thought I would give it a chance and attended a new moon circle. As a queer person of color living in a flyover state, I had very low standards. I was used to being burned by performative allyship and virtue signalers. These witches were different. My first circle was a transformative experience as a solitary witch. Missing Witches Coven is what was missing from my practice. I'm so grateful to be found. Anyway, those are some of the people who bring you this podcast. And if that sounds like your people, then come find out more at missingwitches.com. We've been missing you.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
In early August this year, 2023, the capital of the former Hawaiian kingdom of the 1800s and home to Hawaiian chiefs for centuries, burned in what the governor called the worst natural disaster in the history of Hawaii. It was the most lethal wildfire in the U.S. since 1918. The count of the dead stands at 115, and an unknown number of people are still missing. Far-right conspiracy theorists grabbed onto the burning pain of lost lives and lost history and shared doctored images claiming a space laser was involved. Researchers found that a Chinese government-directed disinformation campaign used the disaster to attempt to sow discord in the U.S., and that residents were discouraged from getting help by disinformation aggressively spread by people who regularly use social media to spread Russian propaganda. I am up in the night coughing again. I lie there for a while, and then it's 5, so I start to write. I'm thinking about Ho'oponopono. I'm not feeling well, in a way that unfolds from the pain in my throat and ache in my belly out along vectors of chronic exhaustion from being a parent during climate crisis, during plague years, wildfires coating our throats with smoke, friends unhoused, the sense of being in a world stretched so thin. And the little one is not the only one with nightmares breaking through her sleep. It's 5 a.m. and I'm thinking about violence and colonialism and the hunger for capital and power that breaks minds, chips away at social ties and ecological ties, ties to ancestors and history, and makes sociopaths. And I'm thinking about the means and uses of ritual, the ways of tying knots one by one to hold on to some kind of hope, some belief in possible futures. My bed is covered in books about Hawaiian history and spirituality. My mind is a tangle that looks something like the 52 tabs I have open in my web browser on everything from the role invasive grasses imported to aid cattle farming played in the Lahaina fires, to the history of the Great Mahele that resulted in the loss of common land, the enormous transfer of wealth and identity from Native Hawaiians to colonizer corporations, to writing on how white men invented a spiritual system based on European spirituality and then claimed it as ancient Hawaiian knowledge called huna, and how it became baked into American witchcraft traditions. I'm at the stage in these writing seasons we have conjured for ourselves with the Missing Witches podcast, where, in trying to feel along the lines of a story, to feel the tangles and tensions and relationality and politics and power that led me to a person whose story I want to know, I am all tied up. In my fever dream, I see a net, and I think this is a story about women, grandmothers, who saw images of fires raging on the horizon, saw the loss of their people behind them in a wall of sorrow, saw their ancient family traditions sold like plastic leis and tiki mugs, And they tried to untangle generations of loss and invasion to find a way to knit the past into the future, not by careful not to wayfind a kind of health again. I am thinking about Ho'oponopono. You could be forgiven for thinking Ho'oponopono is a repetition of phrases that can blast you past your limitations, grant you miracle chakra healing, and help you manifest your divine destiny. This is all in just the first page of results in a search on Amazon Books for Ho'oponopono. But I am sending reverence today to Mary Kawena Pukui and to Morrnah Simeona, to the gatherers of stories and genealogies and chants and dances, the ways and means of healing in community, those who took what might have felt like the last seeds left on a scorched earth and tossed them as far as they could, planted them into the hearts of colonizer nations in the hope that even as the rampant individualism of self-care obsessed New Age hybridized those seeds, packaged and resold them, even then they might colonize the colonizer, root secrets into rapacious systems, crack them slowly from the inside. It's 5 a.m. and I am on unceded Anishinaabe territory, where the leaves are changing. The autumn decay is glorious and everywhere, and I am dreaming post-colonial fever dreams. Mary Kawena Pukui, born 1895 in Ka'au, Hawaii, was the source gatherer, declared a living treasure of traditional Hawaiian culture and spirituality, raised by her grandmother, Nali'ipo Aemoku, who was a kahuna, medicinal expert, and kahuna midwife. Kahuna is a reverential term indicating expertise. There were several traditional areas for people to develop their expertise and to earn their place in this pantheon. And they all seem to have had at their center land, kinship, and community in a way that understood relationships like a careful weaving. Mary's grandmother was a respected healer and a hula dancer in the court of Queen Emma, who ruled from 1856 to 1863. Hula was forbidden in public by 1830, as the royal family navigated decades of pressure from missionaries and continued to privately patronize the hula. By the 1850s, public hula was regulated by a system of licensing. Sacred traditional hula traced its origins back to the creation of the islands, the creation of the world. These were dances from the sacred that were performed open-hearted, bare-chested, and accompanied only by chants which held both ancient history and a vibrational power. Nali'ipo Aemoku, grandmother, dancer, kahuna, delivered Mary and asked her parents for the child to raise in the traditional way, and her request was granted. Kawena was born into the fire clan of Kau. Kawena and her grandmother were inseparable, and the child was taught many things she needed to know. Mary was also educated in missionary schools and became a teacher of Hawaiian history and culture in those same schools at a time when the pressure to forget parts of that culture was enormous. She was from a line of people who remembered ancient stories in their bodies, in dances where the gestures encoded sacred knowledge and jokes, too. As a teenager, she began collecting and translated Hawaiian folktales, proverbs, and sayings. She worked at the Beatrice P. Bishop Museum from 1938 to 1961 as an ethnological assistant and translator. She taught Hawaiian language and culture to scholars and anthropologists. She published more than 50 scholarly works. Pukui is the co-author of the definitive Hawaiian English Dictionary, as well as Place Names of Hawaii, and The Echo of Our Song, a translation of old chants and songs. Her 2-volume set, Nana Ike Kumu, Look to the Source, contains gathered stories about Hawaiian ritual, family practices, of personal and collective healing. She wrote the dictionary. She gave things their names. She preserved names and revealed the layers of meaning. She preserved sacred traditions and knowledge as best she could, and one of the practices she rescued was Ho'oponopono. Ho'oponopono, quote, survives largely through the efforts and determination of Mary Kawena Pukui. From the mid-1960s through the early 1970s, Pukui had the opportunity to ensure that this part of Hawaiian culture would not die. She collaborated with mental health professionals and social workers at the Queen Liliuokalani Children's Center to codify the cultural practices in systematic terms that could be understood and learned by modern professionals and families. She wanted to ensure that Hawaiian families would once again be able to use Ho'oponopono. A hypothetical Ho'oponopono to illustrate basic procedures. I have called you, all children, to come here and look into this problem with me. Your brother Kipi is losing the sight of one eye. We want to save the other eye, so that is why we called you together. We will all pray together, and then we'll discuss things. O Jehovah God, creator of heaven and earth, and his Son Jesus Christ, we ask your help. To our Omakua, from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south, from zenith to horizon, from the upper strata and the lower strata, hearken, come. We want to discuss together and get your guidance and help so we can know what is wrong with this boy. Mrs. Pukui then questioned each child. What came to light first was that Kahana was angry with Kipi over some mischievous prank he had played. The brother-sister disharmony was settled promptly before any further questioning. Kipi admitted his misbehavior, then followed the conceptual ritual of Kala. This, again geared to the young, went as follows. Kahana, are you willing to Kala your brother? Yes. Free him entirely of this entanglement of your anger? Yes. Remember, Kahana, as you loosen your brother from his trespasses, you loosen yourself too. As you forgive, you are forgiven. Now, who do you want to forgive you? Please, God, forgive me. Yes, we will ask that now. You gods, hear now that Kahana is to free her brother of his trespasses, and to free him from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet, to the four corners of his body. May he be happy later. And you, Kipi, are you willing to Kala your sister for being angry with you? Nearly identical phrases of Kala were addressed to Kipi. The significant use of free and loosen rather than forget is discussed in the definition of the word Kala. Then Kipi was questioned more intensively. The boy confessed to stealing some money. He also owned up to an Hawaiian offense. He had thrown stones at an elepaio, a bird form of a family o Makua. For both, he expressed contrition and asked for forgiveness. Then Mrs. Pukui again prayed. To you, O God, and your sacred Son, and all the Aumakua everywhere, hearken to this prayer. This boy is sorry for what he has done. I am sorry he has done such things, so please free him of his trespasses. Then followed arrangements for restitution. Kipi was to work small jobs and earn enough to return the money. His sisters agreed to help him. And to make amends with offended Aumakua, he was to offer and burn a food sacrifice of an egg and a tea leaf. This symbolized the traditional chicken and pig used in pani closing rites. This settled, Mrs. Pukui concluded, now we dismiss our Ho'oponopono, and we pray that all this trouble be taken away and laid away. O great eyeball of the sun, please take all this bundle of wrongdoing. Take it out to the west with you. And as you go down again to your rest, please take all the faults and trespasses that were committed. Lay all of this in the depth of the sea, never more to come back. There are several examples of traditional Ho'oponopono, and look to the source, but I love this one. I think because Mary wrote it herself and because she did it to show two worlds together, the way they could be woven and knotted into something beautiful, something syncretic that could pull the past into the present where a new faith had taken hold. She holds on to the reverence and power of ancestors and the sun. She demonstrates a praxis for repair to the web as a whole. She wrote, My people believed that the taking of medicine was of little help without first removing any and all mental obstructions. When a problem arose in the family affecting an individual or the group as a whole, every member of the immediate family turned to the Ho'oponopono. Every one of us searched our hearts for any hard feelings of one against the other and did some thorough mental house cleaning. We forgave and were forgiven, thrashing out every grudge, peeve, or sentiment among us. In this way, we became a very closely bound family unit. According to Pukui, the burden of the problems needed to be lifted from their minds before their bodies were ready for medical treatment. And listener, witches, weavers, healers, and activists, this is why I keep thinking about Ho'oponopono. Because so much New Age culture and Instagram witchcraft feels stuck in a kind of thinking about self-care and manifesting shit you want. And this makes no sense while the world burns. We need to untangle the histories of our magics and try to tell the truth if we're going to survive active, well-funded distortion machines bent on sowing hellfire. Today, folks in witchy or New Age circles are often familiar with a version of Ho'oponopono that is summarized in 4 phrases. I am sorry, please forgive me, I thank you, and I love you. A version of Hawaiian philosophy and spirituality that's sold as huna, though neither of these are actually indigenous in source. In Mana for a New Age, Rachel Morrnah traces part of this history, focusing on the way the Hawaiian concept of mana is extracted and becomes a staple of New Age and contemporary pagan practices. Quote, Mana entered the New Age movement primarily through the spiritual practice known as huna, the invention of white American teacher and writer Max Freedom Long. The most sympathetic Hawaiian account from scholar and living treasure of Hawaii, Charles Ken, highlights the limitations of a genuinely Hawaiian influence in Long's work. Ken was a friend and longtime correspondent of Long who spent some time as one of his huna research associates in Los Angeles in the late 1940s. In 1949, having returned to Hawaii, he wrote in a letter to a member of the HRA that, I have no doubt about Long's sincerity, but he may have introduced some non-huna factors on account of his white man's mind. 10 years later, he wrote to his friend, author and scholar, Leinani Melville Jones, that Max Long was auana, to stray, morally or mentally. He wrote, I too cannot swallow his huna stuff, and I told him so. Max means well, but being a heole is unable to comprehend the inner meaning of the kahuna philosophy. Far from being able to learn of Hawaiian spiritual traditions, which it seemed he originally hoped to do, in the end, the huna method that Long developed was a Western esoteric system, dressed up, with a few Hawaiian terms and some scattered stories and imagery. Building on the base of Long's writings, many authors from the continental United States have expanded upon the tradition of huna and core concepts such as mana. Chief among these contemporary proponents of huna is Serge Kahili King, a prolific writer and teacher of huna in New Age workshops, including in Hawaii. King is Anglo-American and a former student of Long's, who claims to have been adopted into the Hawaiian Kahili family by his Hawaiian teacher, although this has been disputed. He describes huna as, quote, the Polynesian philosophy and practice of effective living, end quote, demonstrating the way in which the ideas of huna fit within the broader New Age movement in focusing first and foremost on self-improvement of the individual. Serge King defines mana as all power comes from within. And it's in this formulation that it enters both modern witchcraft, especially the fairy tradition, as well as New Age healing pyramid schemes. Morrnah writes, by the 21st century, these principles were being reproduced in images posted on the Facebook page of the Kalani Retreat Center, which claims to be the largest retreat center in Hawaii. In the poster for the 6th principle, mana, all power comes from within, the words are superimposed upon an image of a woman holding a yoga pose on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Kalani is a well-loved destination for yoga, wellness, and Hawaiian culture, personal retreats, and volunteer vacations. In 2011, the center ran a huna workshop, which was promoted as follows. According to the ancient Hawaiian huna philosophy, all illness is a result of stress. Modern medical research continues to prove this relationship, linking stress to everything from high blood pressure to weight gain. If you know how to relieve tension, the body's healing energy can flow and you can achieve instant healing. This workshop reveals ancient secrets to managing stress, as well as the latest information on achieving optimal health. Instant healing, optimal health, all for sale today with a convenient down payment plan. Morrnah continues. Very different from that of New Age and pagan conceptions, the mana of Kanaka Maoli, indigenous Hawaiians with knowledge of the land and the kinship and genealogies. Their healing evokes a collective power, mobilized for the purposes of transforming a whole community. I want to anchor myself in this recognition of collective power for transforming communities. But I also want to tease out the complications here because the Huna version of Ho'oponopono has a Kanaka Maoli woman as the source too. The story isn't as simple as white people stealing things and indigenous people being victimized. Indigenous philosophers, healers, activists, and witches know that there have always been weavers, story keepers, transgressors, truth tellers hidden in plain sight, disrupting from the inside. An inescapable part of the history of colonization is the creative trickster resistance of those who would not be colonized. It is in no way my job to teach indigenous histories or philosophies anywhere. I bury myself in these stories because I want to learn about what I've been missing. And I know that part of what we're missing is stories of indigenous women who were and are connected to their source, working their expertise and connection to their power, understood in an identity that sees their craft and will, and not just their victimization. 1975, Morrnah Simeona, a descendant from two powerful kahunas, a kahuna herself in healing with words, begins to adapt the Ho'oponopono, inspired by Christianity and her studies of Indian and Chinese philosophy, as well as the channeled works of medium Edgar Cayce. This indigenous wisdom keeper takes white knowledge and uses it to her own ends, I assume because she sincerely believed in the power of her own praxis, to weave and to untangle. Morrnah and Simeona presented the Ho'oponopono process for the first time at the Huna World Convention in Honolulu, Hawaii, in August 1980. She used her will and her mind, and she developed something she wanted to share. It's not her fault it was taken up by white people, who position themselves as keepers of ancient Hawaiian secrets, which they sell at expensive retreats. It also doesn't feel correct, though, to erase her from that history, to frame men like Serge King and John Freedom Long as solitary actors, when Morrnah was there, trying to do something else, something she believed in. Serge Kahili King, who authored the book Instant Healing, Mastering the Way of the Hawaiian Shaman, wrote a piece called Ho'oponopono Revealed. The basic practice designed by Morrnah was simply to express forgiveness for something on behalf of someone else. She used to visit battlefields and forgive all the anger and pain and suffering that happened there. And she would walk down the street and connect with the people who had placed coins in parking meters and ask forgiveness on their behalf. As she herself said, clean, erase and find your own Shangri-La, where, within yourself, the process is essentially about freedom, complete freedom from the past. King continues, her work is being carried on by Dr. Hu Len, who has emphasized the extension of one's identity to include anything or anyone else who needs healing. He developed the formulistic phrase, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. By repetition of these phrases, a person was supposed to connect his or her own light with the light of the divine source, and over time dissolve disharmonious patterns in the subconscious. Today, this is probably the most well-known version of Ho'oponopono as a healing practice outside of Hawaii. Both Mary and Morrnah were raised in the heart of the culture. Mary dedicated her life to documenting it and treasuring it, and she makes clear that healing happens in community. Before an illness can be treated, the threads between the hearts and minds and histories of people had to be gently untangled. The truth has to come out. The layers needed to be pulled back. Morrnah was a master of Hawaiian healing massage. Lomi Lomi has been called the connection of the heart, hand, and soul with the source of all life. Morrnah studied anatomy as well as the laying on of hands. She wrote, "Western man has gone to the extremes with his intellectualism. It divides and keeps people separate. Man then becomes a destroyer because he manages and copes, rather than letting the perpetuating force of the divinity flow through him for right action." She recognized the depth of disease and pain from which Western civilization needed healing, and knew that Ho'oponopono could help. Ho'oponopono means to make right or to rectify an error. The traditional format required the entire family to attend the healing. With a moderator present, each family member had a chance to ask for forgiveness from the others. Morrnah thought this form of resolution, forgiveness, healing could help the people she met when they visited her spas. But she also knew that Western communities and families were fragmented. So, in 1976, when Morrnah was 63, she began to develop a new form of Ho'oponopono, modifying the original process. She saw the ways individualism and imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy had broken and fragmented the web. And so she altered a sacred praxis of her people. Who has permission to alter and to export? Who gives such permission, and what are the constraints? I don't know what the right answer is, and it's not really for me to say, but this permission is granted to some visionaries, or perhaps they give it to themselves, who changed the praxis and changed the world. Morrnah was one. Morrnah toured the world lecturing about her adapted version of Ho'oponopono and founded the Pacifica seminars to continue the tradition. And so Ho'oponopono becomes a practice that's exportable, lightweight, and memeable. And that's okay, I guess, as long as we insist upon remembering that it is also rooted in a specific place: history, land, ecosystem, social and cultural context, in interpersonal relations, and in action, in actively making restitution. Mary's book, Look to the Source, continues with this testimony. Ho'oponopono seems to be a supreme effort at self-help on a responsible adult level. It also has the spiritual dimension so vital to the Hawaiian people. And even here, prayers to Omakua in the past or God in the present are responsible adult prayers. The appeal is not the childlike "rescue me, get me out of this scrape." Rather, it is, "Please provide the spiritual strength we need to work out this problem. Help us to help ourselves." This is the kind of magic I am looking for. What I want is a craft that draws in community, family, politics, and goes all the way into the body and all the way out into the web of the world. I want all the social determinants of health accounted for in conversations about healing, including climate crisis, poverty, wages, and the love and messages from my 10,000 ancestors, because moving energy from the stars into my bones and asking for forgiveness from my energy and yours will not be enough. We need fucking healthcare too. And we need to listen to each other's stories of violation and heroism and spirit. And we need to make restitution. A connection with land established by me talking to the trees in my neighborhood will not be enough without the truth-telling and reparations that will put the land and the people back into a net of right relations. Witnessing the wisdom in the waves isn't enough when access to the beach is privatized. Here at Missing Witches, we are driven by longing for missing threads, missing knowledge, missing context. I think a lot about what has been lost in translation. As Malcolm Naea Chun points out in their book Ho'oponopono, Traditional Ways of Healing to Make Things Right Again, an article entitled Te Tala by Zephyrin Kahoali'i Kepolino is distorted by the translators, rendering Te Tala as counter-sorcery. But Te Tala literally means to forgive. And inserting this into the translation opens up questions about how magic and craft got distorted and buried by missionary thinking. Forgiveness, Te Tala, is something associated with all the priests involved with sorcery. The skilled guardian of sorcery was able to counter Te Tana Ana, the sorcery of others. This was the true priest, and one who was not able to do so was unskilled. So I have to ask, if forgiveness is counter-sorcery, then how should sorcery have been translated in the first place? Some of the kahuna's expert knowledge was called sorcery, and they were said to have power over death. Traditional ho'oponopono would be led by a member of the family who was trusted, who knew both sides, or by a kahuna, sorcerer, healer, adept in calling forth the truth. A sorcerer, a witch, finds the truth, follows the threads into human hearts and social relations, and into the painful facts of injustice. They help find words and rituals and practical action that will help that truth find the peace it needs before it festers and brings death. In a colonial context where the truth was that 90% of the people who had lived on the islands had died following contact with the white men, that the land had been transferred away from those who were left into the hands of white American businessmen, that the people lived often in great poverty while tourists partied, it's not surprising that a ritual and knowledge keeper dedicated to the social and spiritual context of disease would be mocked, feared, labeled as sorcerer. Quote, "For when Christianity came in more than a century ago, Ho'oponopono went out. Because Ho'oponopono prayers and rituals were addressed to pagan gods, the Akua and Aumakua, the total Ho'oponopono was labeled pagan. Many Hawaiians came to believe their time-honored method of family therapy was a stupid heathen thing. Some practiced Ho'oponopono secretly. As time went on, Hawaiians remembered not Ho'oponopono, but only bits and pieces of it, or grafted on innovations, or mutations, or complete distortions of the concept, procedure, and vocabulary. Fortune-telling was called Ho'oponopono. So were unintelligible rituals. This lady prayed over me, I think in Portuguese. The kahuna prayed in Hawaiian so low I didn't know what he was saying. I went to this man and he chanted something. A self-styled kahuna offered to kill by sorcery, and this was called Ho'oponopono. The Mormon family circle and any family discussion were termed Ho'oponopono. Many Hawaiians called family prayers Ho'oponopono. One client said Ho'oponopono was fasting and praying 3 days. Another said it meant blessing the house and casting out demons. Others said it meant reading the Bible and forgiving each other. Mary was dedicated to finding the stories, words, and oral histories of rituals that would connect her people to their wisdom at a time when it was slipping away. Since Mary was a gatherer of the meanings of words, here is a definition of terms in Ho'oponopono, offered as a map to the stages in the process of the ritual. And I hope you'll extend a little forgiveness to my pronunciations throughout this piece. Hihia, entangled or entanglement, snarl or snarled, enmeshed. Kukulu kumuhana, the pooling of our strengths, emotional, psychological, and spiritual, for a shared purpose. Group dynamics characterized by spiritual elements and directed to a positive goal. A unified, unifying force. In broad context, a group, national or worldwide spiritual force, constructive and helpful in manner. In Ho'oponopono, the uniting of family members in a spiritual force to help an ill or troubled member. Mahiki, to peel off, to pry, as in to peel the bark of a tree to judge the wood beneath, to scrape at the skin to remove a tiny insect burrowed beneath the epidermis. Also, to cast out, as of a spirit. Ho'omalu, to shelter, protect, make peace, keep quiet, control, suspend. A period of peace and quiet. Silent period. Mihi, repentance, confession, apology. Kala, to release, untie, unbind, and let go. Witches, it's 5 a.m. and dawn is a long ways off. Here in the dark, in the coven we make between our ears, let's light a candle for Mary and for Morrnah too. And in their honor, let's reach out to tell true stories and to make reparations, to reach into ourselves for forgiveness and to reach for each other in defiance of the clone armies of dictators who desperately want us at war. Let us turn our magic to the vision of the fishing net, tied not by sturdy, truthful knot, that unified and unifying force that refuses to give up on each other and insists on making shelter for the magic in the world.
You must be a witch.
The Missing Witches podcast is created by Risa Dickens and Amy Torok, with insight and support from the Coven. Amy and Risa are the co-authors of Missing Witches, Reclaiming True Histories of Feminist Magic and of New Moon Magic, 13 anti-capitalist tools for resistance and re-enchantment. Available now wherever you get your books or audiobooks. Find out more at missingwitches.com.